A 13-year-old girl was sold by her father to be the wife of a millionaire, 7 years later. Urgent shouting echoed from inside the house. "Emma! Get back here now!" The girl startled and turned her head, seeing her father, Robert, standing at the doorway with a pale, anxious face. His voice was hoarse, tinged with desperation. Emma left the steps and ran quickly toward him. As soon as she entered the house, she felt the air inside was suffocatingly heavy. Her thin, frail mother, Lucy, was sitting on the floor, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Beside her stood a middle-aged man in a dark suit, a long scar running down his cheek. His arms were crossed, and he was staring at Emma with a cold, piercing gaze. "This the girl?" he asked, his deep voice full of menace. Emma instinctively stepped back. She could feel the danger. Her father nodded repeatedly, his voice trembling. Yes, she's Emma." The man narrowed his eyes at her, then turned to Robert. "You know the rules. If you can't pay back the money, you have to hand over something of equal value. Lucky for you, someone happens to be interested in this girl." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. Her father didn't answer right away. Her mother burst into tears, clutching desperately at his sleeve. Please don't do this," Lucy sobbed. "She's only 13 years old, how could she possibly?" The man cut her off sharply. "I don't care. A debt must be paid. Otherwise, I'm afraid no one in this house will live to see tomorrow." Emma, panicked, turned to her father, but he only lowered his head, his eyes full of hopelessness. "Dad!" she stammered. "I don't understand. What are you going to do?" Her father clenched his teeth. Finally, he forced out words that made Emma freeze in place. I'm going to marry you off to Alexander Mitchell." Time seemed to stand still. Emma's eyes widened. Her heart felt as if it were being crushed. No. No way. No way. She shook her head wildly, backing away as if trying to escape the suffocating house. But the man's voice shattered any remaining hope. "Alexander is a promising young businessman. He agreed to erase your father's debt under the condition that you become his legal wife." Emma stared at the father she had always trusted. "You can't do this to me. I'm only 13. I have no other choice, Emma," Robert said, as if trying to justify himself. Lucy broke down in tears. Emma tore herself free from her father's grip and ran toward the door. But before she could reach it, 2 unfamiliar men appeared and blocked her way. "Where do you think you're going, little girl?" one of them sneered, grabbing her wrist tightly. "Let me go!" Emma screamed, struggling fiercely, but she couldn't break free from the man's strength. "Tie her up." The order came cold and emotionless. In an instant, Emma was dragged backward, her arms pinned tightly. "Mom!" Emma screamed in desperation, tears streaming down her face. Her mother lunged forward, but one of the men shoved her hard, sending her to the floor. "Please, don't take her. I'm begging you." Lucy cried out, but her pleas were ignored. Robert couldn't even look at his daughter. Emma was forced into a sleek black car. As the door slammed shut, she saw her mother collapse onto the ground, screaming into the dark street. When Emma opened her eyes again, she was in a strange room. Everything around her was unfamiliar and lavish. In front of her stood a woman with her arms crossed, staring at Emma intently. She was wearing an expensive velvet dress, her eyes sharp as blades. "Emma?" Her voice was so cold it made Emma shiver. "I am Caroline, Alexander's stepmother. From now on, you will follow my rules." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I want to go home. I don't want to marry anyone." Caroline let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Home? Do you think you even have a home to go back to? Your father sold you. Those words fell like sharp knives, cutting deep into the little girl's soul. No, no way. And where is Alexander? Emma desperately searched for one last glimmer of hope. But a deep, cold voice sounded from behind her. You don't need to know. Emma turned around. Standing before her was Alexander Mitchell, the husband she had never met. He was tall, his dark eyes brooding, his handsome face as cold as stone. Why are you doing this to me? Emma choked out. Alexander didn't answer. He merely cast a glance at her, his expression utterly emotionless, then turned and walked away. From now on, behave yourself. Otherwise, you'll regret it. The door closed with a heavy thud, leaving Emma alone in the cold darkness. She curled up in the vast, chilling room. She couldn't believe this was where she was going to live from now on. The bed was covered in pristine white sheets, the vanity was luxurious, and a crystal chandelier sparkled overhead. Everything was beautiful, but none of it brought her any warmth. The 13-year-old girl huddled into a corner of the bed, her tears still wet on her cheeks. Suddenly, the door opened. A middle-aged woman with dark brown hair stepped inside, carrying a tray of food. She set it down on the wooden table and looked at Emma with contempt. Stand up. Emma didn't move. I said, stand up. The woman's voice grew harsher as she walked over and grabbed Emma's arm, yanking her to her feet. I'm Diana, the housekeeper of this estate. From now on, you will follow the rules here. Every mistake has consequences. Emma glanced at the plate of food. Her stomach was empty, but her throat was tight. I want to go home. She whispered, her voice trembling. Diana scoffed. Home. Do you really think you still have a home to return to? The words cut into Emma's heart like a blade. If you don't want to eat, don't expect another meal. No one is allowed to waste food in this house. With that, Diana left the room, leaving Emma alone with the cold, untouched meal. The next morning, Emma woke to soft light filtering through the curtains. She rubbed her eyes, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. This wasn't a nightmare, this was real. The door burst open again. This time, it was Caroline. She crossed her arms, her sharp eyes icy cold. Get up. From now on, you are no longer a child. You are Alexander Mitchell's wife, and you will act accordingly. I don't want to. I'm not anybody's wife. Caroline sneered and stepped closer. You don't have a choice here. She threw a crumpled gray dress onto the bed. Put it on. And remember, you are not anyone's lady here. You were brought here to pay a debt. Don't expect to be treated like royalty in this house. Emma clenched her fists, anger rising inside her, but she knew there was nothing she could do. Caroline stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away. Before leaving the room, she said coldly. From now on, you will work in this house. You are not allowed to go outside, not allowed to contact anyone, and you are forbidden to disobey me. The door slammed shut, burying Emma's last bit of hope. 1 week later, Emma began to understand what it truly meant to live in a prison. Every day, she was forced to do the lowest chores, cleaning the mansion, scrubbing the floors, washing dishes. Her small hands were cracked and bleeding, her feet so sore and numb she could barely feel them. Hurry up. Diana barked when Emma accidentally spilled some water. I'm sorry. Emma rushed to wipe it up, but Diana's slap landed harshly across her face without mercy. Useless brat. Can't you do anything right? Caroline stood at a distance, watching Emma kneeling on the floor, her gaze void of any sympathy. Let her keep working. A girl like her doesn't deserve to rest. Day after day, Emma lived like a shadow. No one cared. No one protected her. They lived under the same roof, but the number of times Emma saw Alexander's face could be counted on one hand. Whenever he passed by, he only spared her a fleeting glance before continuing on as if she didn't exist. One night, Emma gathered her courage and blocked Alexander at his bedroom door. "Why won't you say anything? Why do you let them treat me like this?" Alexander frowned, his eyes sharp and cold. "What do you want me to do? At least let me leave this place." He let out a faint, mocking laugh. "Where do you think you'll go? Your father sold you. You have nowhere to go anymore." Emma clenched the fabric of her dress, tears filling her eyes. "Do you have a heart? Don't you see I'm just a child?" Alexander stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. "Whether you live or die has nothing to do with me." The door closed. Emma collapsed to the floor, her heart shattered. She finally understood. No one could save her, except herself. Emma couldn't even remember the last time she had a peaceful night's sleep. She often woke up in the middle of the night from nightmares where she was trapped inside an iron cage, her hands reaching out but no one helping her. The panic made her sit up abruptly, her whole body drenched in cold sweat. But reality was even more terrifying than her dreams. Every day, she had to endure the cruel and senseless rules that Caroline had imposed. You are not allowed to look Alexander in the eye. You are not allowed to eat at the same table as the family. You are not allowed to speak unless given permission. These rules were shackles, binding her tightly. Emma couldn't understand why Caroline hated her so much. The woman didn't just want her to live in humiliation, she wanted Emma to disappear like a shadow. One day, while Emma was scrubbing the floor, she heard the sharp sound of high heels echoing down the hallway. She looked up. Caroline was walking toward her, holding an expensive crystal glass in her hand. "Take this and wash it." Emma quickly took the glass. But the moment her fingers touched it, Caroline abruptly let go, causing it to fall and shatter on the floor. The sound of breaking glass rang out sharply. Emma's heart pounded. She instinctively stepped back. Caroline glared at her with cold, sharp eyes. "Clumsy girl. But I didn't drop." Smack. A slap struck Emma straight across the face. She was stunned, her eyes stinging, her cheek burning hot. Caroline's face remained cold and emotionless. "Clean it up." Emma bit her lip and knelt down, picking up each shard of glass with her bare hands. The sharp edges sliced into her skin, and blood dripped steadily from her fingers, but she didn't dare make a sound. Diana, the housekeeper, stood nearby with her arms crossed, watching her, but neither she nor anyone else made a move to help. Caroline smirked faintly. "If you stay this clumsy, I'll have you kneel here all day." With that, she turned away, leaving Emma alone with her bleeding hands. No one cared. No one protected her. The young girl clenched her fists tightly, her eyes burning with fury. That afternoon, Emma's stomach growled with hunger. She stole a glance toward the dining room. The delicious smell of food wafted through the air as the servants carried in steaming plates of stew and crispy, golden bread. She swallowed hard. For days now, she'd been fed only stale crusts of bread and cold water. She took a tentative step forward, but Diana blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" I'm hungry." "And you think you deserve to sit at the same table as the family?" Diana sneered. At that moment, Caroline was already seated at the head of the table. She elegantly cut a piece of beef and brought it to her mouth, chewing slowly. Her eyes flicked toward Emma. "If you want to eat," Caroline said, "then you need to know your place." "What do you mean?" Emma whispered. Caroline set her fork down and looked straight at Diana. "Give her the servant's tray." Diana nodded and dragged Emma into the kitchen. There, Emma saw a small plate with nothing but a piece of hard bread and a bowl of cold, greasy broth. "Eat," Diana ordered. Emma took the plate in her trembling hands. She could hardly believe this was the only meal she was going to get. Everyone else in the house was feasting, while she, a 13-year-old child, was treated like a beggar. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she bit her lip hard, refusing to let them fall. That night, Emma curled up in the corner of her room, her stomach still aching with hunger. Laughter and conversation drifted in from the living room, where Alexander and his guests were enjoying an extravagant dinner. Emma's hatred for Alexander burned stronger than ever. Since the day she arrived, he had never once protected her. Even when he had witnessed her being humiliated, he had coldly turned away without a word. "He's no different from the rest of them," Emma muttered to herself. She understood now. No one in this house saw her as a human being. A few days later, Caroline came up with a new way to torment her. That morning, just after Emma finished cleaning the living room, Caroline walked in with a faint, chilling smile. "Such a beautiful day, isn't it?" Emma stayed silent. Caroline tilted her head, then said coldly, "Go outside and kneel in the yard." Emma blinked in confusion. "Why? You're asking me why?" Caroline's smile widened, but it was devoid of warmth. "Because I said so. But I didn't do anything wrong." Smack. Another slap, hard and merciless. "I don't need a reason to punish you." Emma clenched her teeth and stepped outside. The sun was harsh, the ground searing hot beneath her knees. Diana and the other servants stood watching, but none of them dared to say a word. Emma knelt. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. An hour. The pain spread from her knees to her entire body. Sweat ran down her face, her throat parched and burning. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't allow herself to cry. If she cried, it meant she had lost. Caroline stood at a distance, her lips curving into a satisfied smirk. "Good. Remember your place, Emma." It wasn't until the sun set that Emma was finally allowed to stand up. Her legs were numb, her whole body drained of strength. She dragged herself back toward her room, but Alexander was suddenly standing in front of her door. She stopped, staring at him with bloodshot eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. Alexander remained silent. "You saw them treat me like a dog. And you didn't say a word." Still, he didn't respond. Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Are you that much of a coward?" A flash of anger sparked in Alexander's eyes, but all he said was, "There's nothing I can do." Emma shuddered slightly. Now she understood. Alexander wasn't cruel. He was weak. She clenched her fists. If she wanted to survive, she had to save herself. Emma knew that if she didn't get out of this place, she would slowly wither away like a bird trapped in a cage. Caroline would never let her go. Diana would continue to torment her. And Alexander would always stand by, watching without lifting a finger. She had to escape. But the question was, where could she go? Her parents had sold her. The neighbors wouldn't dare help her. And if she was caught, Caroline would make sure she paid dearly. But no matter what, she couldn't keep enduring this life. Emma began to watch closely. She memorized the servants' routes, the gardener's shift changes, the locations of the locked doors. Every overheard conversation mattered. The back door only opens at 5 a.m. for food deliveries. Diana always checks her room at 10 p.m., and after that, she sleeps very deeply. Every small piece of information was important. Emma made a plan. That night, there was no moon. The mansion was silent. Emma held her breath and carefully opened her door. The hallway was empty. She moved quietly, each step as light as a cat stalking its prey. When she reached the kitchen, she tightened her grip on the handle of the back door. If she could just get through it, she'd run as fast as she could. But just as she was about to push it open, a voice came from behind her. "And where do you think you're going, little girl?" Emma's heart plummeted. She turned around. Diana was standing there, arms crossed, her eyes cold as ice. Beside her were two male servants holding oil lamps, their faces expressionless. "Grab her." Emma lunged for the door, but before she could touch it, she was yanked back. "No. Let me go," she screamed, thrashing violently. But she was no match for the two large men. They dragged her toward the stairs, pulling her up as she kicked and cried. "Let me go. I don't want to stay here anymore." "Shut up." One of the men tightened his grip on her arm until she cried out in pain. The door to Caroline's room opened. Emma was thrown to the floor like a broken doll. Caroline stood there, staring down at her as if she were a filthy rat. "You thought you could escape?" Caroline's voice was ice-cold. Emma trembled, but she forced herself to lift her head. "I'm not your slave." Smack. The slap sent her reeling, her mind spinning. "You're not a slave, are you?" Caroline sneered. "Then I'll teach you exactly what you are." She turned to Diana. "Lock her in the dark room. No food. No water. 3 days. Emma's eyes widened in shock. "No. I'll die." Caroline bent down, staring directly into her eyes. "If you die, no one will care." The dark room. It was exactly as its name suggested, a small space with no windows, surrounded by cold, damp walls. The smell of mold and mildew hit her immediately. The door slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed everything. Emma's heart pounded wildly. She rushed to the door and pounded on it with all her strength. "Please, don't lock me in here. Please." No one answered. No one cared. She was left alone in absolute darkness. And in that moment, she knew she was completely alone. Day 1. Her throat burned with thirst, her tongue dry and rough. Her stomach twisted painfully, but there was nothing to eat. Little by little, her senses began to fade. Day 2. Emma was too exhausted to pound on the door anymore. She lay curled up on the cold ground, trembling in the dark. In her mind, she pictured herself lying under the sun, her mother's arms wrapped around her. But it was only an illusion. She had been sold. She had been abandoned. Day 3. Emma no longer knew if she was alive or dead. Everything blurred into nothingness. Until finally, the door swung open. A faint, pale light spilled into the room. Diana stood there. "Get out." Emma tried to sit up, but her legs had no strength left. Diana sneered. She turned and motioned to someone behind her. A male servant stepped forward, grabbed Emma by the collar, and dragged her out. She no longer had the energy to fight back. Only her eyes remained wide open, filled with hatred. That evening, Emma was finally given something to eat. A thin bowl of watery porridge, flavorless and cold. She devoured it without hesitation, ignoring everything around her. Diana stood nearby, arms crossed. "Have you learned your lesson yet?" Emma didn't answer. But she understood now. In this place, she wasn't a person. She was nothing more than an object. But she swore. She would never give up. After 3 days locked in the dark room, Emma was no longer the naive little girl she once was. She had learned the rules of this house. She wasn't a person. She was just a tool to repay a debt. From that day on, she stopped crying. She stopped begging anyone for anything. But she never forgot. One evening, after the family had finished dinner, Emma was summoned to the living room. Caroline sat on an opulent armchair, and next to her was Alexander. Emma clenched her fists. For the first time in days, she faced her so-called husband directly. "You're not just an ordinary little girl anymore, Emma," Caroline said coldly. "You're Alexander's wife now, so you'd better understand your place." "Wife?" Emma let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "You lock me up like a prisoner, and you call me his wife?" Alexander's brows furrowed slightly. Caroline's eyes flashed with warning. "Haven't you learned enough of your lessons?" Emma clenched her fists even tighter, but she knew if she rebelled right now, it would only make things worse. She had to stay calm. "I will follow your rules," she said slowly. "But I want to ask Alexander one thing." Caroline narrowed her eyes. "What?" Emma turned to Alexander. "You've seen everything, haven't you? You've seen your stepmother torment me, seen me starved, locked in a dark room. Don't you feel anything?" Alexander said nothing. Emma stared deep into his eyes, searching for something, anything. But there was only emptiness. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger. Alexander leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I didn't have a choice." Emma blinked. "No choice?" Alexander let out a faint, bitter laugh. "Do you really think you're the only victim here?" Emma held her breath. Those words. They left her shaken. That night, she couldn't sleep. Alexander's voice echoed in her mind over and over again. "Do you really think you're the only victim here?" Alexander wasn't like the cruel people she had thought he was. He wasn't the one who beat her. He wasn't the one who directly tormented her. But he still chose silence. Why? The next day, Emma made up her mind to find out the truth. She knew she couldn't ask Alexander directly, he would never answer her. So, she sought out Sophia, one of the longest-serving maids in the mansion. Sophia was a woman in her 30s, kinder than the other servants, but always silent about everything that went on in the house. That day, when Sophia was folding clothes in the laundry room, Emma approached her. "Sophia." The woman looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes when Emma spoke to her first. "What is it?" Emma lowered her voice. "I want to know the truth about Alexander." Sophia blinked quickly, then shook her head at once. "You shouldn't be asking about these things, Emma." "Why not?" "I have the right to know." Sophia bit her lip and glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might be listening. Then, she grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her into a corner, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Alexander isn't the true heir of the Mitchell family." Emma froze. "What?" Sophia looked down, her tone carrying a trace of pity. "His birth mother was a servant. When she became pregnant with Alexander, the former master, Alexander's father, forced her to leave the house. But after she died, Alexander was brought back to this mansion." Emma stood there, stunned. Sophia continued, "Since he was a child, Caroline has controlled him. He grew up like a shadow, never allowed to make decisions for his own life. Even marrying you was just part of her plan." Emma felt the blood in her veins run cold. Everything she had believed about Alexander. Had she been wrong all along? That night, when the house fell into silence, Emma decided to see the truth for herself. She slipped out of her room and carefully made her way down to the library. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. She felt her way to the large wooden cabinet, the one Sophia had told her about, where Caroline kept important documents. Click. The drawer opened. Inside, stacks of old files were neatly arranged. Emma's hands trembled as she flipped through each page, her eyes widening when they landed on a specific document. Alexander Mitchell, illegitimate child. Her hand clenched tightly around the paper. This was proof. Alexander was not the legitimate son of Mr. Mitchell. Which meant, he had no true claim to the inheritance. Then why was he still here? There was only one answer. Caroline kept him because she needed a puppet to control. The next morning, Emma made up her mind. She was going to confront Alexander. She found him in the reading room. Alexander looked up as she entered. "What do you want?" Emma held the paper out in front of him. "I know the truth now." Alexander glanced at the document, and his expression immediately changed. The cold detachment was gone. What replaced it was fear. "Where did you get this?" His voice dropped, low and tense. Emma stared directly at him. "Why do you let her control your life? Why don't you stand up to her?" Alexander clenched his fists tightly. "You don't understand." "I do understand," Emma said, her voice sharp. "She's ruined my life. And I won't let her keep ruining yours." Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "And what are you going to do? A 13-year-old girl against Caroline?" Emma didn't blink. "If I do nothing, I'll die in this mansion." Alexander stared at her for a long time. For the first time, he had no argument. After her conversation with Alexander, Emma knew she couldn't stop now. She had uncovered one piece of the truth. Alexander wasn't the true heir of the Mitchell family. He was just a puppet in Caroline's hands. But what about herself? Why did Caroline want her in this house? She was only the daughter of a poor man, sold off as payment for a debt. But if that was all, why hadn't Caroline killed her from the start? Why was she being kept alive? What value did she still have that Caroline hadn't exploited? 2 days later, Emma decided to search for more evidence. She knew she couldn't make a single mistake. If Caroline found out, it would be over. So she waited for her opportunity. And it came one evening, when Caroline and Alexander left the house for an important party. The mansion was left with only Diana, a few servants, and some guards. Emma pretended to go about her usual chores, dusting the library. But this time, she wasn't there to clean. The Mitchell Mansion's library held its most important documents. Financial records, contracts, and files that no one but Caroline was supposed to touch. But Emma knew, even the biggest secrets always had a crack in them. She moved toward the file cabinet where she had previously found Alexander's birth certificate. But this time, she was searching for something else. Her own name. She flipped through file after file, her hands trembling. Until she pulled out an old bundle of papers with a name she never expected to see. Lucy Harris. Her mother. Emma's eyes widened. Why was her mother's name in the Mitchell family's records? She turned to the next page. And as she read the words written there, her whole body turned cold. The document detailed a large sum of money transferred from the Mitchell family to her father, Robert Harris. But it wasn't a loan. It wasn't a simple debt. It was payment in exchange for a secret. A child. Her. Emma held her breath, eyes glued to the next lines on the page. Lucy Harris, a servant of the Mitchell family, became pregnant by the master of the house in an unintended affair. To keep this secret buried, the Mitchell family paid a large sum to Robert Harris, ordering him to claim the child as his own and to never reveal the truth. If this truth were ever exposed, the consequences would be severe. The paper slipped from Emma's hands and fell to the floor. She couldn't breathe. She wasn't Robert's biological daughter. She was the illegitimate child of someone in the Mitchell family. And Caroline had known. She had known from the beginning. That was why she hadn't killed Emma. Why she had kept her here. Because Emma was part of the Mitchell bloodline. And if the truth came out, it could shake Caroline's entire position. Footsteps echoed outside the library. Emma's heart leapt in her chest. She quickly snatched the paper from the ground and stuffed it inside her dress. The door burst open. Diana entered, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" Emma forced herself to stay calm. I'm cleaning." Diana glanced around the room, her expression unreadable. You look a little tense, don't you? It's nothing, Emma replied quickly. Diana stared at her for a long moment before turning away. You'd better be careful. If you do anything stupid, the consequences will be severe. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She clutched the paper tightly in her hand, struggling to hold back tears. What had her mother done to be cast out? Had she loved Emma's real father? Or had she been just another victim of the Mitchell family? Anne. Had Caroline known all of this before forcing her to marry Alexander? If Caroline had known, what was her real plan? The next morning, when Alexander returned home, Emma confronted him again. She held the paper out in front of him. Did you know about this? Alexander glanced at the document, and then froze. His eyes darkened. Where did you find this? Emma let out a cold, bitter laugh. So you knew. Alexander's hand clenched tightly around the paper, his face shadowed in anger. Caroline never told me about this. But she knew, Emma said through gritted teeth. She always knew. Alexander was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet Emma could barely hear it. If you're here because of a debt, then so am I. Emma stared at him. What do you mean? Alexander turned away, refusing to answer. And for the first time, Emma felt true fear. Not because of Caroline. Not because of Diana. But because of the truth she had just uncovered. She was part of the Mitchell family. And if Caroline found out that Emma had discovered this secret, she would never let her live. Emma no longer had any doubts. Caroline was her true enemy. She had destroyed Emma's life, controlled Alexander like a puppet. And more than anything, she knew Emma's secret. If Caroline found out she already knew the truth, Emma wouldn't have a life left to live. So, she had to act first. She had to bring Caroline down. But to do that, she needed evidence. 3 days later, Emma began her plan. She was no longer the weak little girl she once was. She watched carefully. She memorized everything Caroline did, the people she met, the secret phone calls. She realized that Caroline wasn't just manipulating Alexander, she was also hiding enormous financial secrets. Caroline had embezzled money from the Mitchell family estate. She was involved in shady deals to keep power in her hands. And if this information got out, Caroline would be destroyed. One evening, Emma snuck into Caroline's office. She knew Caroline always locked the filing cabinet, but she was prepared. For days, she had watched Diana take the key from its hiding place. She discovered. Diana kept it in the kitchen drawer. Emma had waited for the right moment to take it. And tonight, she had her chance. She quietly opened the drawer, took the key, and quickly ran upstairs. Her heart pounded as she slid the key into the lock. Click. The cabinet opened. Inside were the most important documents of the Mitchell family. Emma's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. She couldn't believe her eyes. Huge amounts of money had been embezzled. Documents proved Caroline had forged papers to seize assets. Shady contracts with businessmen that no one knew about. And an old letter. From her biological father. Emma nearly stopped breathing as she read the handwriting on the letter. If one day my daughter returns to this house, it means Caroline has betrayed our agreement. She is never to have control over the girl. If the girl is forced into marriage, it means Caroline has crossed the line. Whoever finds this letter, bring it to Alexander Mitchell. This letter was undeniable proof. Her father had never wanted her to fall into Caroline's hands. Caroline had betrayed everyone. At that moment, the door swung open. Diana. She stood at the doorway, her eyes wide in shock as she saw Emma holding the documents. What are you doing here? Emma knew if she didn't act immediately, everything would collapse. She lunged toward the window, threw the letter and a few documents outside. "You dare," Diana charged at her, but Emma twisted around and kicked hard at her leg. Diana staggered but still grabbed onto Emma's arm tightly. "You think you can get away with this?" Emma gritted her teeth and bit down hard on Diana's hand. Diana screamed and let her go. Emma ran like crazy down the stairs. She heard Diana shouting to the servants. "Catch her. She stole the mistress's documents." Emma's heart was racing wildly. She ran out into the yard, grabbed the papers she had thrown down, and dashed toward Alexander. Alexander was in his study when Emma burst in. He frowned when he saw her panting, panic in her eyes. "What are you doing now?" Emma threw the documents onto his desk. "Look." Alexander frowned deeper, picking up a sheet of paper. His eyes darkened as he read it. "This. It's the truth," Emma said quickly. "She betrayed your father. She used both you and me to keep her power." Alexander froze. He stared at his father's letter, then clenched his fists. "No, this can't be." Emma stepped closer. "You know I'm right. You know she never saw you as her real son. She only needed you as a puppet." Alexander trembled. For the first time, Emma saw fear in his eyes. But after a few seconds, that fear turned into anger. "She lied to everyone." Emma nodded. "And if we don't act now, she'll keep destroying us." Alexander gripped the letter tightly. He took a deep breath, then raised his head. "What do you want?" Emma clenched her fists. "I want to bring her down." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Then, he gave a slight nod. "All right." Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Finally. She had pulled Alexander to her side. The real battle began now. Emma looked straight at Alexander. There was no turning back for either of them. Caroline had controlled them for too long. She had destroyed Emma's childhood, turned Alexander into a man without a voice of his own, and manipulated everyone in this mansion. But now, she was about to lose everything. "I have a plan," Emma said, her voice steadier than ever. Alexander stared at her. "What plan?" Emma placed the stack of documents on the table. "I've gathered enough evidence. We can bring everything into the light." Alexander clenched his fists. He had spent his entire life living in fear under Caroline's control. But today, he had no other choice. "We have to make sure it's airtight." Emma nodded. They both knew they had only one shot. If they failed, Caroline would destroy them. But if they succeeded, they would be free. They secretly contacted Ethan Foster, a journalist known for exposing major scandals in the business world. Emma sent him the documents she had found in Caroline's filing cabinet, the embezzled funds, the fraudulent contracts, the secrets Caroline had kept hidden for years. "This is going to cause a huge stir," Ethan said over the phone. "We want it to cause a huge stir," Emma replied firmly. Ethan promised to prepare a special report to reveal the truth. And to do that, they needed Caroline to show up in front of the media. They had to lure her into the trap. A week later, they held a press conference. Alexander announced to the public that the Mitchell family had an important statement to make. Caroline suspected nothing. She still thought she was in control. But she had no idea everything was about to collapse. On the day of the press conference, Caroline appeared in an expensive dress, her face full of pride. She stepped up to the podium, ready to display her power as she always did. But right then, Alexander took the microphone. "Today, I have an important truth to reveal." Caroline frowned. She had no idea what Alexander was about to say. "I've stayed silent for too long. But today, I won't be anyone's puppet anymore. Alexander turned to look straight at Caroline. My stepmother, Mrs. Caroline Mitchell, has embezzled millions of USD from the family estate. The entire room erupted. Caroline froze in shock. What did you just say? She screamed. Alexander held up the documents Emma had given him. This is the evidence. You deceived everyone. You controlled me, manipulated this family, and oppressed those who couldn't defend themselves. He glanced at Emma. She stepped forward, holding up the final piece of paper. And this is the secret you've kept hidden for so many years. She raised the letter from her biological father. I'm not just a girl who was sold to pay a debt. I am the illegitimate daughter of the Mitchell family. Caroline's eyes widened in shock. No. No, that's impossible. The reporters in the room scrambled to take pictures, bombarding them with questions. Caroline's dark secrets were now exposed to millions. She had nowhere left to run. At that moment, the police arrived. They walked up to the podium and presented an arrest warrant. Mrs. Caroline Mitchell, you are under arrest for financial fraud and abuse of power. Caroline panicked. She turned to Alexander. You can't do this to me. I raised you. Alexander looked at her calmly. You never saw me as your son. Caroline turned to Emma, her eyes burning with hatred. You'll pay for this. Emma was no longer afraid. She stared right back at her. No. You're the one who's going to pay. The police handcuffed Caroline and dragged her away. In front of dozens of cameras, she was taken like a true criminal. The press conference ended, but its consequences would last forever. News reports ran non-stop. Caroline Mitchell arrested for financial fraud. Shocking truth about the Mitchell family exposed. Caroline lost everything, her honor, her power. Once a woman of immense influence, she was now just a disgraced criminal shamed before the entire world. When it was finally over, Emma turned to Alexander. Will you be all right? Alexander looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. For the first time, I feel truly free. Emma took a deep breath. At last. She had won. But her life wasn't over. She still had to decide her own path. And this time, she was the one in control. Caroline Mitchell, the woman who had once controlled everything, was now dragged away in disgrace. She screamed, struggling, but the handcuffs around her wrists kept her chained to reality. The reporters snapped pictures relentlessly, capturing the moment a queen was dethroned. Alexander watched, his eyes devoid of any pity. And Emma. She felt a lightness in her heart. A week later, the news of Caroline's arrest was still all over the papers. Powerful businesswoman Caroline Mitchell charged with financial fraud. The Mitchell empire collapses. Caroline Mitchell faces up to 20 years in prison. It was over. Caroline had no power left, no money, nothing at all. She would have to pay for everything she had done. At the Mitchell estate. Emma stepped into the garden for the first time in years, no longer forbidden. Sunlight warmed her skin, and a gentle breeze played through her hair. She was free now. She was no longer a prisoner in this mansion. Diana, the one who had tormented her, had been dismissed. The servants in the house had started treating her with respect. But the most important thing was, she no longer had to bow her head to anyone. Alexander found her that afternoon. He looked tired, but there was a lightness in his expression she had never seen before. What are you going to do next? He asked. Emma turned toward him, her gaze calm. I don't know. But I know for sure I won't stay here. Alexander frowned slightly. I understand. You've endured too much pain in this place. Emma didn't deny it. It was true. This mansion had once been her personal hell. But now, she had won. She didn't have to be afraid of it anymore. At the same time, news about Caroline continued to flood in. She was being held in a temporary detention center, awaiting trial. Reporters crowded outside, eager to capture her downfall. Caroline was no longer the proud queen she once was. Now, she was locked behind iron bars, no longer able to command anyone. The room was small and cramped. The food was meager. The other inmates looked at her like she was prey. Everything she had ever possessed was gone. The day of the trial, Caroline walked into the courtroom, her wrists shackled, her face pale from lack of sleep. She glanced around, desperate for a familiar face. But no one stood by her side. Alexander only watched from a distance, saying nothing. Emma was there too. She wanted to witness, with her own eyes, the end of the woman who had destroyed her life. The judge spoke. Caroline Mitchell, you are charged with embezzlement, financial fraud, and abuse of power. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Caroline bit her lip hard. She looked at Emma, hatred still burning in her eyes. But Emma was no longer afraid of her. She stood there calmly, as if staring at a stranger. I have nothing to say, Caroline whispered. The judge nodded. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds Caroline Mitchell guilty. She is hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison. The courtroom fell silent. Caroline stood frozen. She couldn't believe it. It was really over. As the police led her away, she turned back for one last look at Alexander. You can't do this to me. I'm your mother. Alexander gave her a faint, cold smile. You were never my mother. Caroline went rigid. She wanted to scream, to fight back. But this time, no one was listening anymore. She was dragged away like a true criminal. After the trial, Emma and Alexander stepped out of the courthouse. The sky was a clear blue, not a single cloud in sight. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in so many years, she felt truly at peace. Alexander turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. You did it. Emma opened her eyes, looking straight ahead. No, we did it. Alexander smiled. So, where will you go? Emma gave a faint smile. Anywhere. As long as I'm not imprisoned anymore. Emma was free. Caroline had been punished, Alexander had broken free from the chains of his past, and she. Now, she could take control of her own life. But as she stepped out of the courthouse, one question echoed in her mind. Where will I go? What will I do? For so many years, she had known nothing but the struggle to survive. But now, she didn't need to fight anymore. She could start over. A few weeks later, Emma left the Mitchell estate. She refused to take any inheritance from the family, she wanted to build her life with her own hands. She traveled to a peaceful countryside in the southern United States. A small town where no one knew who she was. Here, she could live an ordinary life. No more imprisonment. No more fear. In the town of Charleston, Emma started over. She found a job at a small cafe in the center of town. The owner was Mrs. Mary, a kind-hearted woman in her 50s. Mrs. Mary didn't ask about Emma's past. She only looked at her with warm eyes and said, "You seem like a strong girl. As long as you work hard, you'll always have a place here." Emma smiled. For the first time in years, she felt welcomed. Her new life slowly settled into place. She learned how to make coffee, how to chat with customers. She laughed more. She no longer looked back on her past with pain. She had learned how to live. One late afternoon, a man walked into the cafe. He was tall, with a strong build, and his slightly messy brown hair. He didn't look like the usual customers. When he stepped inside, Emma felt something unusual. He approached the counter, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "A black coffee, please." Emma smiled faintly. You like it bitter? He shrugged. I like the bitterness. It keeps me awake. She let out a soft laugh, poured the coffee into a cup, and slid it over to him. Awake for what? The man looked up at her. To remind myself I'm still alive. Emma froze. That sentence, it was too familiar. It was exactly how she used to feel. During all those years in the Mitchell estate, she had thought the same thing. She looked at him, curiosity glimmering in her eyes. Who are you? The man took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. I'm Lucas. I came here looking for a new beginning. Emma shivered slightly. So had she. From that day on, Lucas became a regular at the cafe. He came every morning, ordering the same black coffee. He didn't talk much, but when he spoke with Emma, there was a strange sense of understanding between them. Little by little, Emma began to open up. She told him about her past, not everything, but enough for him to understand what she had been through. Lucas never judged her. He simply listened. And that made Emma feel safe. One evening, Lucas invited Emma to go for a walk. They strolled along Charleston's old streets, under the soft glow of the street lamps. Do you regret it? Lucas asked. Emma glanced at him, her brows slightly furrowed. Regret what? Everything that happened. Standing up to Caroline. Leaving the Mitchell family. Emma was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. No. I've never regretted it. Lucas nodded, as if he understood that feeling perfectly. Neither have I. Emma looked at him. You have a painful past too. Lucas shrugged. Who doesn't? They were quiet for a while. Then Lucas said softly. But the past doesn't define us. What matters is what we do with the present. Emma smiled faintly. You're right. She had never imagined she would have a conversation like this. But with Lucas, she felt like she could say anything. She felt. She was no longer alone. 1 year later, Emma was no longer the fragile girl imprisoned in the Mitchell estate. She was a strong, independent woman. She lived the life she had once dreamed of. She and Lucas became a couple. Together, they opened a small coffee shop. A place where people could come, relax, and find peace. Emma had finally found her happiness. And this time, no one could take it away from her. Their wedding took place in a small garden by the sea. No extravagance, no luxury. But it was the wedding Emma had always wished for. She wore a simple white dress, glowing more than ever. Lucas held her hand, his eyes full of love. Are you ready? He asked. Emma smiled. I've never been more ready. Emma's story teaches us that the greatest strength lies within ourselves. No matter how oppressed, betrayed, or stripped of everything we are. As long as we don't give up. We can always take back our lives. Persistence and courage helped Emma overthrow the one who controlled her. Assert her worth. And find true happiness. Her story also reminds us that justice always prevails. The wicked will eventually pay for what they've done. And only those who stand up can take charge of their destiny.